Today at 6, a major escalation in Ukraine. For the first time in months, the capital Kyiv is bombarded by Russian forces. The missile attacks were horrific and indiscriminate, according to NATO, many directed at civilian buildings and facilities. Some of the capital's tourist infrastructure has been destroyed. We'll be reporting from Kyiv on the impact of Russia's actions.
These were not military targets. The children's playground through the trees, part of the University of Kyiv over there, and this is a government department of science and education.
Yes, we'll have the latest from Paul Adams in Kyiv and from Moscow, where President Putin accuses Ukraine of mounting terrorist attacks against Russia. Also on the programme. Lucy Letby goes on trial. She pleads not guilty to the murder of 7 babies, the attempted murder of 10 others at a hospital in Chester. In Aberdeen, Nicola Sturgeon tells the SNP that the economic case for Scottish independence would be published by her in a week's time. And how councils across the UK are supporting warm hubs where people can keep snug at a time of rising energy bills.
Coming up on Sports Day, later in the hour on BBC News, there's a premature end to the W Series season. The championship for female drivers scraps its last 3 races because of financial reasons.
Good evening. Parts of Ukraine have suffered the biggest bombardment by Russian forces since the early weeks of the conflict. More than 80 missiles have struck both industrial and civilian buildings. And it's the first time the capital Kyiv has been targeted in months. President Putin says the strikes on Ukraine are retaliation for Saturday's attack on a key bridge linking Russia with its occupied land in Crimea. Well, as the capital Kyiv, the 4 areas that we can see on the map that's coming up in Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv and Lviv. There they are for you, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the areas. They reported missile attacks by the Russians as well. And President Putin this afternoon has said that he's threatening even more action. Our correspondent Paul Adams reports from the centre of Kyiv, where those strikes began early this morning. A warning, there are some distressing details coming up.
After months of quiet in the capital, the war is back. For 3 chaotic hours this morning, the missiles kept coming. For one young woman already recording her own sense of shock, a narrow escape.
A major city in the south of the country.
My BBC colleague Hugo Bashega was broadcasting live when it all began.
So
they want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They are hopeless. The second target is people. Such a time, such goals were specially chosen to cause as much damage as possible. But we are Ukrainians. We help each other. We believe in ourselves. We restore everything that is destroyed.
Tourist locations were hit too. This, the city's famous glass bridge. At times, it felt like a city being punished in its favourite, most iconic places. For many, it meant a hasty return to bomb shelters not used for months.
They want to destroy our people, our infrastructure, everything. I really don't know, and I'm extremely angry, you know.
When Moscow decided it had done enough, it ended. The clean-up began. There are bodies lying on the street here in this elegant European capital. It's been almost 4 months since the last attack in Kyiv. In 3 short hours, a growing sense of normality was shattered. This is the first time missiles have landed right here in the centre of Kyiv. And these were not military targets. The children's playground through the trees, part of the University of Kyiv over there. And this is a government department of science and education. Nearby, a huge crater in a place where children come to play. Olena and Valery live around the corner. Their children and grandchildren know this place well.
Oh,
it's horrible. This is our life. And just now,
I don't know, an abyss has opened up in our lives. It's terrible. We'll be more careful now. When the sirens sound, we'll go straight to the shelter.
In the southern city of Zaporizhia, it was another hellish night. One of many in recent days. Another 14 civilians died in one apartment block. 10 missiles fell around Dnipro, one landing right in front of a bus. And far to the west, explosions in Lviv. This city hasn't been hit since the spring. Much of it is still without power. In Kiev's famously deep metro, they gathered and sang. People lived down here for weeks when the war began. 2 days ago, Ukraine was celebrating an attack on Russia's bridge to Crimea. Today, that euphoria is gone. Fear once again stalking the capital. Paul Adams, BBC News, Kiev.
Well, Paul mentioned the attack on the bridge there. President Putin says the strikes across Ukraine were made following what he called terrorist actions by the Ukrainian government. It comes after that bombing of that strategically important bridge on Saturday, a very big explosion which badly damaged the Kerch Bridge. The only one, there you can see how strategically vital it is, the only one linking Russia with occupied Crimea. It's a vital route for Russia's military supplies. Now, the Russian president said today that the attack could not go unanswered, although it must be said Ukraine hasn't declared any involvement in the explosion, and really still it's unclear what caused the explosion. Russia was quick to suggest it was a truck bomb, but some experts say that they think it could have been a massive explosion below the level of the bridge. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has the latest developments for us.
After the missile strikes on Ukraine, a Kremlin threat to Kiev.
If any more attempts are made to carry out terrorist attacks on our territory, Russia's response will be harsh and will be equal to the threat posed to the Russian Federation. Nobody should have any doubts about that.
The Kremlin has no doubts that it was Ukrainian special services that did this. To the bridge between Russia and annexed Crimea. Russia's response, the bombardment of Ukraine. The missile strikes were from land, air and sea. Russian state TV saw them as a turning point. We've gone on the attack now, on all fronts, she says. The UN Secretary-General accused Moscow of an unacceptable escalation. But if you think the Kremlin cares, think again.
Vladimir Putin will not be distracted by international criticism of these Russian attacks. He gives the impression of a leader who has long stopped caring about what the rest of the world thinks about him. His strategy, if there is one, is to keep escalating, to increase the pressure on Ukraine and on the West.
I think that...
But escalation increases the risks, the dangers for all sides.
Well, the conflict itself is very dangerous because neither side can afford to lose. And that means that the risks of escalations are always there. And of course, at least in theory, that implies that under certain set of circumstances, this escalation could go as high as a nuclear war.
And what about the Russian public? Surveys show that escalation is sparking growing anxiety. People here were worried by the missile strikes on Ukraine and the attack on the Crimean bridge. They shouldn't have blown up the bridge, Nikolai says. It was a big mistake. I don't support shelling civilian targets, but we had to respond. Now, though, I worry about things escalating.
It's very bad for Ukrainians, of course. It's war, and I'm really sorry about them. And I don't know what to say. It's awful.
The Kremlin feels no public pressure to change course. For now, that gives President Putin a free hand to act however he wants. And that means continued confrontation. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
So to pick up on Steve's last point there, what do developments over recent days tell us about the current state of this conflict? Well, as we've heard, the bombing of that Kerch bridge at the weekend appears to have led now to this latest bombardment. Just yesterday, we saw residents in Kyiv celebrating with a mural showing the bridge on fire, so their feelings were pretty clear about that. Ukraine has been making military gains over the past few weeks. They've been taking more territory, despite Russia's self-declared annexation of these 4 areas, which we've been reporting a lot about in recent weeks. And although Russia has been struggling to make progress, what's happened now is that President Putin has, of course, responded with a clear show of force today. Let's join our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, in Kyiv. And John, what is your assessment of where this conflict now lies, given what's happened today?
Well, Hugh, I've been in these sort of situations various times over the past. It doesn't work to bomb a country in the way that Russia has been bombing Ukraine today. It simply doesn't work. Sure, it does a lot of damage to the power and water supplies, and we've been told that by this evening some of those will be mended, perhaps most of them will be mended, and we'll get the power and the water coming back again. So in terms of the damage it's done, it's pretty minimal, even though there has been an awful lot of damage. But what really happens always is that people's morale rises, and it just makes Ukrainians absolutely determined to keep on fighting. So you've got President Putin, who's got lots of people on the more extreme edges of the opinions about the war, including his new military commander, who seems to want to really drive it through. But at the same time, the methods that Russia's using simply reinforce the whole idea here that this war is winnable and should be won.
John, many thanks again. John Simpson there, our World Affairs editor in Kyiv. And you can hear more insights from John and the team on the strikes and the accounts on the ground on the Ukrainecast podcast. That's on BBC Sounds if you do a search there. And of course, lots more available on the BBC News app as well. Let's have some of the day's other main news. The Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, has now agreed to set out his plan for balancing the government's finances on the 31st of October. Now, that is nearly a month earlier than originally planned. The economic statement is expected to give details of the Chancellor's plans to pay for £43 billion worth of tax cuts, as well as proposals to reduce debt. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is at Westminster. And Chris, what do you really read into the fact that the timing of this has changed, and who's the Chancellor trying to get the message to?
Hugh, I think we can call this Project Reassurance. They're my words, not theirs, but this is what all of this amounts to. This is the government trying to convince the markets, trying to convince the country that it knows what it's doing, that the numbers can add up. All of this on a day where we learn that the cost of government borrowing is continuing to rise. That has implications when the government is borrowing lots of money. It also has implications for the cost of new mortgages. On that theme of reassurance, more today from the Treasury, with news of a top new team of civil servants being hired, and the government emphasising that they all have loads of experience of the Treasury. Why is that striking? Only a couple of weeks ago, this new government was talking about trying to smash the Treasury orthodoxy, the way things are done. Now they seem to be seeking a virtue out of pointing to experience from the building. And one other strand of reassurance tonight, Hugh, the Prime Minister talking to MPs as they return here to Westminster in the next couple of days, Conservative MPs who are very, very jittery, trying to reassure them too. A difficult time for Liz Truss in recent weeks. Now, she's reassuring, and yet more reassuring, she hopes.
Chris, many thanks again. Chris Mason there, our political editor with the latest at Westminster. The King has sent his condolences to those who lost relatives and friends in the village of Creesloch in County Donegal, where an explosion at a petrol station left 10 people dead. The youngest of the victims was a 5-year-old girl who'd gone to the shop at the petrol station with her father to buy a birthday cake for her mother. Our correspondent Chris Page has spent the day there.
People here will always find it hard to believe that 10 of their own lost their lives at this place. Just as in many villages, the petrol station shop was like a community hub. Local residents who went immediately to help after hearing the blast have been recounting what they found.
There was water coming out of everywhere, there was wires hanging everywhere, and there was sparks. There was people crying for help. A girl who was trapped behind shelving, and we were very fortunate to be able to rescue her and take her out. Then we started to try and handball stuff out and break stuff up and take out blocks and take out debris and try to access the other people that were trapped.
One of the teenagers who died had gone into the shop to buy an ice cream. Leona Harper was an enthusiastic sportsperson who played for the under-14s at Letterkenny Rugby Club.
She had a great sense of humour, a great attitude and a fierce sense of competition. Above all, she was a pleasure to spend time with.
The collective grief is all the more immense, given it seems everybody in the area knew someone who was killed. But the global messages of sympathy are bringing some comfort.
It is like as if the whole world, in a way, has put their arms around us and are carrying us, and just the support is so important, and I thank everyone for it.
Work's been going on today to shield what's left of the petrol station from the road so that investigators can carry on with trying to find out what caused the explosion. A gas leak is one theory, but at this stage nobody can be sure. The rest of this week will be purely a time to mourn. Many people will be going to more than one funeral a day. Donegal is still and sombre in preparation. Chris Page, BBC News, Creasla.
Time is 17 minutes past 6. Our main story this evening. Parts of Ukraine, including the capital, have suffered the biggest bombardment by Russian forces since the early weeks of the conflict. And still to come, the new reporters for the day for a special edition of Radio 1 Newsbeat to mark World Mental Health Day.
Coming up in Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on the BBC News channel, Red Bull say they're surprised and disappointed after being found guilty of breaking Formula One's spending cap last season.
First Minister of Scotland has said that £20 billion will be invested in the first decade if Scotland were to become independent, giving a glimpse into economic proposals being set out a week today by the Scottish Government. Nicola Sturgeon hopes to set up an investment fund using remaining oil revenues and borrowing to support renewable energy, to reduce bills and fuel poverty. The SNP leader also promised to increase a welfare payment for struggling families as she addressed her party conference in Aberdeen. Our Scotland editor James Cook was there.
Nicola Sturgeon has been dreaming of independence since she was a teenager, and now she insists her dream is closer than ever, despite losing a referendum 8 years ago.
Back in 2014, the Westminster establishment told us that it was the UK's standing in the world, its economic strength and its stability that made independence impossible. Now they say it's the UK's isolation, its weakness and instability, the very conditions they created, that means change can't happen. As far as Westminster is concerned, it's heads they win and tails we lose, but this time it will not wash.
The Tories, she said, were guilty of pursuing a damaging, aggressive unionism, and Labour, rising in the polls, were not much better.
Bluntly, they are willing to chuck Scotland under Boris Johnson's Brexit bus to get the keys to Downing Street.
The answer, she said, was simple.
To make sure we get the governments that the largest number of us vote for, always, not just occasionally. For that, my friends, we need Scotland's independence.
They liked that, and a promise that she wouldn't be standing down as leader anytime soon.
Nicola Sturgeon has set out her case that the real threat to Scotland is not independence, but the Union. Next week, she'll flesh out that argument with a paper on the economics of independence. And it may be that that document is even more significant than this speech.
I'm looking at my wee girl when she's up there regardless of what anybody else sees, but I know she'll always deliver. She'll never let us down, so I'm quite relaxed when she starts.
I'm going to be going back to Fife and I will be campaigning for independence. That's what I'm going to do, and it'll be a positive message we're putting out there.
In her speech said, you know, we are the generation of independence, and I think I believe that, you know, and I hope that we do achieve that, and that's why we are all fighting for here.
We have got everything it takes to be a...
But how did the speech go down outside the hall with these pensioners in Glasgow?
I think the problem is we've got to start believing in ourselves.
I tell you something, what Nicola Sturgeon has just said is all fine and all great in the real world. We have to have the money to pay for it all.
I've lived in Scotland all my life and I definitely back us the full way.
Independence, aye, well, I'd like that myself. But I don't know where she's got a big pot of money for.
I was very for independent Scotland, and there's probably a big part of me still has that yearning, but at the same time, I haven't got the answers that I want to the question.
We are the independence generation, said Nicola Sturgeon here, but not, or not yet at least, a generation with independence. James Cook, BBC News, Aberdeen.
The trial has started of a nurse charged with the murder of 7 babies and an attempt to kill 10 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 and 2016. Lucy Letby has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Our North of England correspondent Judith Moritz has more details.
Lucy Letby worked with particularly vulnerable babies, those born prematurely or with illnesses. Her job was to give them the most tender care. Now she's accused of murdering 7 and trying to kill another 10 who survived. In the year between June 2015 and June 2016, the babies were all patients in the neonatal section of the Countess of Chester maternity unit. The prosecution say it's a hospital like many others in the UK, but that unlike those within the unit at Chester, there was a poisoner at work. Lucy Letby entered not guilty pleas to all the charges before her trial got underway. The jury was told that the babies' deaths and collapses were not naturally occurring tragedies. They were the work of the woman in the dock, who was the constant malevolent presence when things took a turn for the worse. The prosecution say the methods by which the 17 babies were harmed or killed varied. Sometimes they were injected with air, sometimes with milk or another fluid, sometimes it was insulin. And the jury was shown a list which compared the times that staff were on shift with the times it's alleged the babies were attacked. And they were told that by a process of elimination, only one person was present every time, Lucy Letby. The court heard that initially the babies were thought to have fallen ill or died as a result of natural causes. Referring to 2 who are alleged to have been poisoned, Nick Johnson KC said it simply did not occur to the medical staff that someone in the neonatal unit would have injected them with insulin. Nobody thought there was someone trying to kill babies in the NNU. The police were eventually called in and the nurse was first arrested in 2018, more than 3 years after the first death. The house which she lived in at the time was searched and the court heard that paperwork relating to some of the babies was discovered. The families of many of the babies have been at court and Lucy Letby's parents have been watching proceedings too. The case against her continues. It's expected to last for 6 months. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Manchester.
Research by the BBC shows many local authorities across the UK are planning to create warm spaces this winter to help people to keep warm as the cost of energy increases. The so-called warm hubs are free to use. Many will be in public buildings which are already being heated, such as libraries and art galleries. Our correspondent Ellie Price has more details.
I'm really looking forward to my lunch today.
I think everybody enjoys that, don't they?
It's Tuesday Club in Stocksfield.
I'll open the door.
This so-called warm hub isn't new. It's been running for the last 7 years. And it's more than just somewhere warm to be. Oh, thank you. Here, there's a 2-course meal and a good catch-up with friends.
Is it useful to have somewhere like this to come and spend
It is, yes. I've turned my heating off this morning when I came out.
With the price of the fuel and everything, it's just somewhere nice and warm to come.
There are 30 warm hubs like this around Northumberland, with another 10 planned. It's a model other areas are looking to replicate.
My advice would be to open this as long as possible, because if people come out for a short time, especially senior residents, they can get cold very quickly. Safeguarding is going to be an issue. People are going to be aware that there perhaps will be vulnerable people at these warm places.
The BBC has heard from 145 councils across the UK, and at least 60 say they already have or will set up some kind of warm space provision this winter. They're mainly in buildings that are already being heated, like the library in the centre of Oxford.
I think it's pretty shocking that we are where we are, but we know that people have been struggling for some time with their energy bills and their food bills. We've seen an increase in the number of food banks around the county. Oxfordshire is considered to be an affluent county, and it's extraordinary that we should be in this situation.
Councils told us they will meet demand this winter, but this should not become the norm.
I look at my smart meter every day and seeing how much it's increasing week by week, and yeah, the thought crosses my mind that maybe I should go somewhere else, turn off the power, go stand somewhere else for a few hours a day.
We're fortunate enough to not need it, but we know people who might, and you know, there are plenty of people in need around here who will use it, I'm sure.
What's an S? Coast.
Back in Stocksfield, the organisers of this warm hub say people in need wouldn't come if it was simply about not being cold. The warmth here comes from the good company as much as the radiators. Ellie Price, BBC News.
Well, a new commemorative 50p coin has been unveiled by the Royal Mint to mark the BBC's centenary. The coin pays tribute to the BBC's global reach. The reverse side of the coin is inscribed with inform, educate and entertain, the values set out by Lord Reith when he founded the BBC back in 1922. The coins were produced before the Queen passed away, which is why they do not bear the image of the new King, King Charles. Well, the Prince and Princess of Wales have recorded a special edition of Radio 1's Newsbeat to mark World Mental Health Day. They became Newsbeat reporters today to lead a discussion with a panel in the field of mental health. So let's join my colleague Priya Rai, who's going to tell us more about what went on. Priya?
Well, let's just set the scene first of all, Hugh. This was all recorded in the Radio 1 Live Lounge here, somewhere that is usually the backdrop for A-list pop stars. But today, the stage was set for something very different, candid conversations about mental health. And from the off, you could tell that they were both eager and cared personally about the topic. They came in, they chatted to the guests that were part of our panel for the show. And then it was lights, camera, action. I handed the mic to them. The Prince and Princess of Wales became Newsbeat reporters. But this wasn't about sticking to script for them, you know. They cared. They listened to the mental health stories and journeys that our panellists shared. And then you could tell that they thought about the questions that they wanted to ask. The Prince about the pressures of social media. The Princess spoke about how we teach and, you know, encourage young people to speak openly and express their feelings and mental health themselves as they're growing up. And they were both quite keen to know what our Newsbeat listeners have said to us in the past about their own mental health. And I got the impression that they wanted to spark a meaningful conversation, really, and discussions that can keep going about mental health. I mean, I told them that I'm just keeping the presenter chair warm for their next visit.
I'm sure you are, Priya. Lots to look forward to then from the content you've just described. When's it being broadcast?
So tomorrow on Newsbeat at 12:45. So that's on Radio 1, 1Extra and on Asia Network, and also on the BBC Sounds app as well. So do join us.
Priya, thanks very much. Priya Rai there at Radio 1 Newsbeat. with some special guests today, but you can hear it tomorrow as she was explaining. It's time for the weather. Louise is here. Hi, Louise.
Hi there, Hugh. Well, at this time of year, when you get those warm, sunny autumn days, you really feel as though you've got to cherish them, don't you? What a glorious day we have seen across much of England and Wales. Heavy early morning rain cleared away, not a cloud in the sky, but at this time of year, those clear skies overnight, well, they may well lead to a touch of frost tonight, as we're likely to see temperatures in one or two places close to freezing. So that could be a little bit of a shock to the system. Still relatively dry though across England and Wales for the next couple of days at least. This is the rainfall accumulation chart, but watch the darker blues starting to develop really from Thursday onwards. And that means that potentially across South Wales, southern England, we could see as much as 40-50 millimetres of rain through the latter stages of this week. The heaviest of the rain once again into western Scotland, but again, still not that much rain in eastern Scotland and northeast England. Now, over the next few hours, we are going to see some sharp showers in the far northwest continuing. And here through the night, that's where we'll keep the clouds, so temperatures holding up. But under those clear skies, yes, it's going to be a chilly start to our Tuesday morning. Hopefully a sparkling one to compensate. Lots of blue sky, lots of sunshine. Further north and west, though, we continue to see a feed of cloud and some showers here. Now, temperatures will sit perhaps at around 11 to 13 degrees here, but in the sunshine, we're likely to see those temperatures again at around 15 or 16 Celsius as a maximum. That weather front on Tuesday takes its time. It's going to push its way steadily eastwards during Wednesday, moving out of Scotland, pushing down into the north of England and to Wales as we go through the day on Wednesday. Not arriving in the southeast just yet. Here, dry, settled and sunny with highs of around 18 degrees. But let's look at this rain then pushing in from the southwest on Thursday. Some of it quite heavy. There's a level of uncertainty just how far north or south this rain is going to go. So it's still subject to change. Keep watching the forecast. But fingers crossed, if you're desperate for rain, we could get some in the south on Thursday. Hugh.
We'll keep watching, Louise. Thank you very much. And that's it from BBC News at 6. The news continues here on BBC One. It's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions, and they're standing by with the news where you are. But from all of us, I'll hopefully see you at 10, but from the rest of the team, goodbye.